Hello, welcome back to Christian's Colloquy. My name is Christian, I'm your host, and today I am bringing you part two of a three-part series offering you a debrief of my research trip to England and Ireland. In the first episode, I covered what it's like organizing a research trip, a bit of a frequently asked questions about getting there and what it's like doing theological research in archives. But in this episode, I will be talking about my time specifically in Oxford, at the archives at the University of Oxford in one of their libraries, which is in England. So I want to share a bit about that. I'll give you a bit of background on me showing up in Oxford, what it's like in Oxford, just the town itself. And then, of course, I'll dive into the library there. And all along, if you're watching on YouTube, I will be showing pictures that I took on this research trip to give you an idea of what researching in Oxford is like. So let me dive in and tell you a little bit about Oxford. And when I'm talking about Oxford, I am pretty much talking about the University of Oxford, because Oxford is a university town through and through. You Google university town in Oxford is essentially the quintessential example of what a university town is. Oxford is dominated by its university. So to give you an idea, I believe that Oxford, I didn't look this up, but I think the city itself, as a city specifically, was incorporated in the 1500s, but the University of Oxford, it was founded all the way back in 1096. So almost 1,000 years ago, the University of Oxford was founded. So to give you an idea, historically, the First Crusade was called in 1095, and I believe the Crusaders actually showed up in Jerusalem in 1099. So between the First Crusade being called and the Crusaders arriving in Jerusalem, within that 4-year gap, the University of Oxford was founded. So to give you an idea, that is as medieval as it comes. We're talking 11th century, the year thousands. So it's a medieval town, and when you show up there, it truly feels like a medieval town. So to give you an idea of why that is so novel to me, if you're watching this from Europe, you're probably like, yeah, big deal. I live among ancient churches and medieval structures. But for me, Canada, my country, the Dominion of Canada, was founded as such really in 1867 with the British North America Act. So that's like nearly 770 years or so older. The University of Oxford is older than my entire country. So when I pass by an old church in Canada, it's founded, and it's an old church building. It might be founded, a really old one, 1820s, 1830s, and you're like, wow, this is ancient. Meanwhile, you go to Oxford, and every building you're passing by has a history that goes back to the 11th century, but the buildings when they're built and are still standing today easily go back to the 17th century, so the 1600s, which is just mind-bogglingly medieval and ancient from my North American perspective. But of course, and I'm hopefully showing some pictures here, Oxford, as much as it's dominated by this ancient university, this ancient institution, because of the realities of modern education and modern interconnectivity, it also feels like a modern city. So on the one hand, it's a medieval university town, you see the old buildings, but on the other hand, you have scholars coming from all over the world, truly. While we were there and looking around, I noticed that there were a lot of Chinese students, a lot of Brazilian students from various countries in Africa. I am amazed to see how many people and how many different languages. So I think that Toronto is a very international city, but while I was there, I heard people speaking French, German, of course, local European languages, but I definitely caught some Portuguese, Russian, Arabic, I assume various Nigerian languages, just given the people there and the dress. And I was there, at the time I was there in Oxford, there were, of course, it was summertime, graduation, so I saw all sorts of people and all sorts of families. It is a thoroughly international city, so when you're going to the restaurants, you will see all sorts of different people, and there are all sorts of different restaurants. One of my favorite there was a Lebanese restaurant, and I also, of course, got traditional English Sri Lankan food at this point. But that's in addition to the fish and chips, and I made sure to enjoy the full English breakfast. So that is all to say, the University of Oxford in the city of Oxford is very much a contrast between ancient medieval institution, University of Oxford, and modern people from all over the world international city coming for education, very popular destination for students from all over the world, and it definitely feels like that. Very busy on the streets there, especially on a weekend in a university town. So anyway, that's the feel of the city. Just to dive a bit more into the university, it's very familiar to me being from the University of Toronto, but this might be new for a lot of people. Oxford runs on a collegiate system. So there's the overarching University of Oxford, but within that, they have, I believe, 43 colleges. So I believe at the University of Toronto, we have the equivalent of that would be our 7 colleges plus a few more theological institutions. But to give you an idea, that means that, so in my case, while I was a student at the University of Toronto doing my undergrad, I was also a student of St. Michael's College. That was my specific college within the university. But students, when they're going to Oxford, they're a part of all sorts of different colleges, King's College, Trinity, all sorts of different ones, University College. And while they are a student at their college, they're also under the overarching University of Oxford kind of label, brand, institution, however you want to phrase it. So that is to give you an idea. 43 colleges. Not only is Oxford an old school, it's also a massive school, a massive institution with all sorts of colleges that come with all sorts of buildings, all sorts of programs, and it is just a massive, massive place. So while I was walking around there, I walked past one of the college chapels, and I'll put up a picture on the screen. This college chapel dwarfed easily the largest churches in Toronto in terms of scale, size, and for me anyway, aesthetics. It was just dominating the landscape, beautiful to look at, just gives you a sense of the scale and the history and the heritage of these many colleges there. Even the relatively younger colleges still feel ancient and old, and that reflects the city of Oxford itself. A lot of religious history, all the way from the Reformation, and of course before that, medieval church history, but definitely the Reformation. They have the Martyrs Memorial there that celebrates the early Anglican reformers and their martyrdom and their sacrifice. And then of course, Oxford was the center of the Oxford movement. Generally, colloquially speaking, you can think of Anglo-Catholicism, but there are, of course, some differences between the Oxford movement and Anglo-Catholicism. I don't know why I'm saying, of course. That is very niche kind of historical information. But anyway, Oxford has a lot going on, not only education-wise, but also religious history. So anyway, I was loving it. And when you're looking at these medieval buildings, a lot of them don't go all the way back to the 1096 years, but a lot of them are built in the 17th century, so the 1600s. So the town not only is old, feels old, it looks old, and you are surrounded by just the amazing history of it all. So as you're walking through, and for example, where I was getting breakfast, the place claimed to be the oldest coffee house in Europe, going back to 1652, I believe. So there I was in this coffee house that is, again, older than my country, older than most things I've seen in Canada. I think everything I've seen in Canada that's not natural landscape. So truly, what a city it is. So I went to Oxford. I'm blabbering about it. Had a good time. Specifically, where I was going for the archives, that's what I really want to talk about. I was going to the University of Oxford. They have the Bodleian Library, which is their big library, but it reflects a group of libraries. So within the Bodleian, they have several buildings that house many, many books. So specifically, University of Oxford, the Bodleian Library, which is actually a system of several libraries, and I was at Weston Library, which I believe is rooted in the New Bodleian, so it's one of the newer libraries. And within Weston Library, this location, I was going to the special collections. So I was doing archive research. I was looking at very historic documents. I wasn't just going into a library like you might imagine a school library, a public library. I was going into the special collections office. Last time I showed you my Bodleian library card. So when I was going in, I was scanning this through a door, a very interesting door. I'll show a picture of that, a very interesting door, but I was scanning in, putting away my stuff, and then going into the special collections area. And specifically, I was going to the rare books and manuscripts reading room. So they have a special room for where people get access to rare books, rare manuscripts. So think the old stuff that you have to collect. If you're interested in the process, I highly encourage watch the first video. I explain a bit about what that's like. So anyway, that door, hopefully I'm showing the picture again right now. That door is fascinating. It speaks to the contrast of Oxford being both a medieval town but also a modern city. I was scanning in using a key card, so very modern, very technological. But I was walking through the door, which had a phrase inscribed in Latin. My Latin, haven't kept up with it, so I had to Google it. But essentially what it says is, if good, or if you are good, enter, or vice versa. Sorry, I looked it up while I was there. I can't quite remember, but enter if you are good. If not, or if you're wicked, or if you're bad, by no means, no entry for you. So it's very interesting contrast walking through a door with a key card, scanning it, while you have this big lot of door just declaring in Latin, if you are good, you may enter, and if you are wicked, by no means. Of course, a lot of theological statement, a lot of theological inquiry could be pressed into that statement. A lot of questions there from a perspective of goodness and human nature and perhaps individual states. But needless to say, I was walking through that door. So I guess Oxford and the Bodleian Library thinks I'm good. At least I didn't run into any issues on that front. Anyway, going into the library there, Oxford, great time, lots of materials. Specifically, I'm studying Edward Bicker, who was a 19th century, he was born in the 18th century, but a 19th century Anglican theologian. He has his family's archive there. So not only him, but the Bicker were an incredibly influential family politically, but most, I would say importantly, I'm doing my theological studies degree, but I would say primarily, that's the word, primarily they were a religious family in the Church of England. So Edward Bicker, he was a 19th century leader of evangelical Anglicans. His son, his nephew, and great-nephew, grandson, so on and so forth, they were all prominent churchmen in the Church of England. Bishops came from them, so the Anglican Bishop of South Tokyo was a Bicker. Many other leaders in the Church of England were Bicker. And ironically, I made connection with through my dad while he was there with me actually in Oxford. So that was a nice little family trip. But he made a connection while I was traveling to my next location on my own. He made a connection with Piers Bicker, who is a direct descendant of Edward Bicker. So fascinating time, fascinating connections, a lot of great history there. And while I was there in the library, I was not only looking at the family Bicker archive, I was looking at, they had his will, his ordination papers. Hopefully I'm showing some pictures again on screen. But also they had his letter books, which were fantastic. But as I mentioned in the earlier video, letter books, you had to be reading that cursive. It was handwritten. Whoever, I don't know if it was Edward Bicker writing his own letters to record them there, or perhaps his son-in-law, who was his biographer, or maybe his daughter, his biographer's wife, Bicker's daughter, maybe transcribing those, or maybe a relative or a friend or someone along those lines. The cursive, reading through that on thin parchment. I will show you a picture of what the thin parchment is like. You can literally see through it. But then, of course, in addition to the Bickersteth family archive, I was looking through the archive of the church's ministry among the Jewish people. So a quintessential evangelical Anglican missions organization that was specifically concerned with reaching the Jewish people. In the time that I'm researching the 19th century, it went by colloquially the name the London Jews Society, but more officially, the London Society for Promoting Christianity Among the Jews was the more original or historic name there. So I was looking at their various papers, covering their minutes, covering speeches and sermons given at society meetings because they would gather to discuss their work. I was looking at various reports, various tracts that they put out both in England, but then, as I mentioned in the last episode, as they sent over to Germany to reach German Jews. And then I was looking at a book by one of their members describing Jewish history in China because that was an interest of theirs. So all sorts of materials. They had materials that were written in all sorts of languages. So I enjoyed looking at that, got a lot of good information for my dissertation. I won't give too much away so that when my dissertation is done and hopefully published, you will want to buy a copy and keep this poor theological PhD eating, simply put. So please, when the dissertation is done, buy the book. Anyway, so had a good time there researching and lots of materials in Oxford. But that is pretty much my time there, the materials that I was looking at. If you're curious to hear more about these evangelical societies or Edward Bicker, happy to make a video. Just let me know. Frankly, I'm not sure if people are interested in that kind of stuff. This channel already is very niche. That would be even more niche. But let me know in the comments. Happy to oblige if you're interested in evangelical missionary societies, missions among the Jews, the Bickersheth family, what they were doing. But that essentially covers my time in Oxford. I hope the pictures help frame it and they were interesting. And if you have any questions about the trip again, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to answer them. But that's it for my time in Oxford. I was at the Weston Library, their rare books room, looking at materials related to the Edward Bickersheth family, specifically his materials, his letter books, his will, his ordination papers. Then I was looking at the various materials from the church's ministry among the Jewish people or the London Jews Society. So that's that. I hope you found it interesting. Stay tuned, really, for my next episode, which will come out after this, hopefully. Which will describe my time in Ireland. And in Ireland, let me tell you, while I was in England, I was just in Oxford. In Ireland, I was all over the place. I was at, I think, 5 different locations across 2 major cities, in 2 countries, technically. I was both in the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, both in Dublin and Belfast, various locations, a lot of interesting stuff. And I would be happy to share about that. So stay tuned for that video, debriefing my time in Ireland. Anyway, that's it for now. I covered a lot. I hope you found it interesting and informative. Again, if you want to get in touch or have any questions, leave them in the comments down below on YouTube. If you're listening via podcast, please feel free to send me an email. However you want to reach me, I would love to hear from you. And of course, if you found this interesting or informative, feel free to share it around, put the like on the video, do whatever you got to do, and invite more people to join us on the journey. Anyway, that's it. Take care. See you next time. Bye.